Time to take to the skies and prepare for the drop, because today we're looking at the Astra Militarum Valkyrie. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy and tactics 40k channel where we're all about making the most out of our models on the table. Now the Valkyrie is an absolutely iconic Imperial Guard unit, which has been very much enjoyed by Guard players since the kit came out in 5th edition, and is a flyer transport for the forces of the Guard and the Militarum Tempestus. In 8th edition, Valkyries haven't been seeing the table quite as much in terms of competitive staying power, but they have seen repeated improvements over the course of chapter approved and various different updates, not least of which came with the greater good with their new rules, including rules for Militarum Tempestus scions. Today we'll be taking a look at the Valkyrie's datasheet, any obvious buffs and synergies that we can do with it on the tabletop, and how I would use them in a Astra Militarum army list. In the background, the Valkyrie is an airborne assault carrier with a vertical takeoff or landing or VTOL capacity, used to ferry elite Imperial Guard regiments to and from combat zones. Valkyries are typically piloted and operated by the Imperial Navy, and can be attached to Imperial Guard regiments under the command of a senior officer. They are considerably more advanced than a lot of the Guard arsenal, limiting their construction to only specific forge worlds. Gunship variants of the Valkyrie do exist as well, the Vulture and the Vendetta, who can pack all manner of heavy war gear, though unfortunately these guys aren't included in the Imperial Guard Codex anymore, and are relegated to Forge World, and they're a bit expensive for what they do. In any case, let's take a look at the rules for the Valkyrie. So Valkyries are a flyer for the Astra Militarum. You can take between 1 and 3 of them as a single flyer slot, and at base they're equipped with a multi-laser and Hellstrike missiles, bringing your Valkyrie in to 117 points at base. For a vehicle of its points cost, they're reasonably tanky, between their high number of wounds and being hard to hit. Valkyries have a movement of between 20 and 45 when they're on their full wounds profile, weapon skill 6 up, ballistic skill 4+, strength and toughness of 7, a mighty 14 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 7 and a 3-up save. Those Hellstrike missiles fire a single shot per turn with a 72-inch range, heavy 1, strength 8, AP -2 and damage d6. Though at all times you roll 2 dice when inflicting the damage with this weapon and discard the lowest result. Between this and a multi-laser, it's not overwhelming for the price tag that you pay for it, meaning that Valkyries are basically going to be used as a transport rather than just operating as a gunship. The Valkyries do have a few options though. First of all, they can swap their multi-laser for a las cannon for an additional 10 points. This one's a bit of a take or leave for me, as the Valkyrie is usually going to be moving, it's usually going to be hitting on 5s, so you're not usually going to be getting much value out of said las cannon. But that being said, the multi-laser is pretty underwhelming for its points cost, so it might be worth getting rid of it for the extra 10 points and actually having the small chance to do some serious damage. In general though, I would be tempted just to keep it cheap with a multi-laser. More interestingly though, you can take 2 multiple rocket pods instead of its Hellstrike missiles. These will cost you an additional 4 points, putting the price of your Valkyrie up to 121 points in total. Now these are assault d6 weapons, meaning that you're going to be getting 2d6 shots out of them at strength 5 and AP -1. Being assault is particularly handy because it means that you're actually going to still hit on 4s when the Valkyrie is moved, and typically I'd say that these are worth the 4 points to upgrade over the Hellstrike missile, which is only going to hit 1 in every 3 shots. Finally, the model can also take 2 heavy bolters, which are represented by the door gunners. Again, unfortunately these guys really suffer from the hitting on 5s penalty when the Valkyrie is moving, so typically I wouldn't choose to take these ones unless you're planning on keeping your Valkyrie still quite a lot, which kind of defeats the point of it as a flyer transport. The Valkyrie has a ton of special rules, including its vehicle squadron special rules, which means that if you have multiple Valkyries in the same unit, they set up within 6 inches of each other, then operate independently as per normal. They have their standard flyer special rules, so hard to hit for -1 to hit when they're not in hover mode. Supersonic, which is the one for pivoting 90 degrees before movement and adding 20 inches whenever they advance. Airborne, which means that it can't be charged by units that aren't fly. And Hoverjet, the option to change its movement value to 20 and lose the advantages and disadvantages of airborne, hard to hit and supersonic. In addition to this, the Valkyrie also has the Roving Gunship special rule. This means that if it enters hover mode, then it will add +1 to its ballistic skill, hitting normally on 3s, or if it moves then it'll be hitting on 4s. This is quite a decent buff to its firepower, and it means that after the model has delivered its cargo, it can actually contribute to the game a little bit more significantly, without having to stay still. Apologies, this one isn't included on this datasheet, as this is the index datasheet, and this rule was added in the Codex update. You have Crash and Burn, which on a roll of a 6 when it's destroyed, means it blows up to scatter D3 mortal wounds all around it. And finally, and more interestingly, you have grav chute insertion. Grav chute insertion is the ability to disembark from this vehicle at any point during its move, rather than just before it moves, as would be normal for transport vehicles. The Valkyrie has to move 20 inches or more. The disembarking units must drop 9 inches away from enemy models, and for each model that does this you roll a dice, and on a 1 it's slain, probably due to messing up its grav chute and falling brutally to its death. This is a pretty nice option and is one of the main reasons to take the Valkyrie, as it means that you can get a shooty or fighty unit right into the heart of enemy lines in turn 1, though losing 1/6 of your squad most certainly has its drawbacks. Talking of transport, the Valkyrie can transport up to 12 Astra Militarum infantry. Each heavy weapons team takes the space of 2 models, and each Ogrin takes the space of 3. So all in all, the Valkyrie is a moderately expensive flying transport, with mediocre firepower, but decent durability and a decent move. It ideally wants to be loaded up with dangerous infantry, to drop them in effective range of enemy units turn 1, or possibly onto objectives. So let's talk about the various ways that we can get more out of our Valkyries. First of all, being Aeronautica Imperialis, unfortunately Valkyries will not ever be able to benefit from regiment traits or the new scion regiments. It's pretty much stock as is. You can include one in a detachment without breaking your regiments for the other models there, but it won't get the benefit itself. This is a bit of a shame, as it would be nice to be able to put regiment traits on them and it would certainly make them more viable. Aeronautica Imperialis do have a little buff in the Officer of the Fleet, a cheap little 20-point model that can allow your Valkyrie to reroll 1s when they're targeting one certain unit that's within 18 inches of the Officer of the Fleet. Reroll 1s isn't exactly going to change the world, but it is quite a cheap character with which to use this buff, and 1 or 2 of these might not be such a bad idea if you are thinking about going quite heavily into Valkyries or other Aeronautica Imperialis units. Other than these, you can also get reroll 1s from Yarick, and Tech Priest Engine Seers could potentially pile some wounds back upon damaged Valkyries, but in general you're not really going to want to faff around with too many characters. They're not really primarily aimed to be damage dealers, and they just need to be transporting your units towards the fight. In terms of what units to put in them, there's quite a lot of options now. From the main Guard Codex, things like veterans with special weapons such as plasma guns or melter guns are prime targets, as they're exactly the sort of unit that you want keeping safe and then dropping right next to the enemy army to unleash some plasma or melter death. Other options are special weapon squads. You could fit 2 of those in one Valkyrie. You could load up some Ogrins or Borgrins to get them to have a chance of a first turn charge, albeit quite low as it will be 9 inches. And of course Valkyries get on very well with the Militarum Tempestus Scions. Of these, the Capic Eagles have a particular synergy with the Valkyrie, in that when they get out of one, they get +1 to hit for the shooting phase after disembarking. This is pretty nice on plasma weapons, avoiding any chances of overheat, but it's great on basically anything that they have. Tempestus Scions also have the nice precision drop stratagem, which is activated when you use the grav chute insertion rule, and it allows them to get out just outside 5 inches rather than outside 9 inches, and above that you also don't suffer any casualties by rolling those d6s. This could be good, particularly when combined with those Capic Eagles. You could drop them within double fire hotshot lasgun range, or within half range for their melter guns to get the additional damage. As well as the actual damage dealers, you could think about including other buff and support characters in your Valkyrie. Things like officers for orders, maybe astropaths for ignoring cover and casting psychic maelstrom, or other psychic buffs, or potentially even some Inquisitor support. The 12-man transport capacity is certainly very useful for this, as it means that you could have a full 10-man veteran squad for example, and still include a couple of buffing characters to make them hit with the biggest bang possible. In terms of stratagems, the Valkyries can use a lot of the standard ones from the Guard Codex, as well as some of the ones from Greater Good. On the Militarum Tempestus side of things, they have a 2 command point stratagem called Hammer Blow. If you kill a model in a unit by an Aeronautica Imperialis flyer, such as the Valkyrie, then that unit is pinned, must half their advance and charge moves, and be -1 to hit the next turn. Killing a model isn't all that hard with those multiple rocket pods, and this could really mess with a key enemy unit, albeit for a fairly steep CP cost. The Scions also have 1 command point for advanced countermeasures. You use this on a Valkyrie pre-game, and it remains hard to hit even when it enters hover mode. This will mean that it's really hard to shift the entire game long, and entering hover mode can be pretty handy for getting optimal positioning and making sure that its guns don't hit on 5s. If you are thinking about using a Valkyrie as a gunship, then this can keep it very durable while significantly increasing its firepower. Also from the new Greater Good book, Relentless can be used to have the Valkyrie operate on its top bracket of its profile for a turn. If you need a surprise turn of movement out of a very damaged Valkyrie, then this can be handy. as well as getting a fair bit of extra firepower if it's down to a lower bracket. Could well be worth 1 command point, this one. In terms of the main Codex Strats, Vengeance Vicadia is always a great one to use on something if you're fighting Chaos. Valkyries could be that something if you don't have any heavier guns to deploy it on. Jury Rigging for 1 command point could be used to get a Valkyrie up into its next bracket to make it hit better in the shooting phase. And Defensive Gunners could potentially catch your opponent by surprise if you just need a little bit more overwatch out of the thing. The Valkyries also have their own Vigilus detachment, the Tempestus Drop Force, which rewards Valkyries and Militarum Tempestus units. They have a warlord trait called Gravshoot Commando that can be used to reroll 1s for any units getting out of a Valkyrie within 6 inches of your warlord, and they have the Aerial Fire Support stratagem, where the Valkyrie can fire Overwatch on a 4+ against a unit that's just about to charge one of your Tempestus Drop Force infantry squads. So say if you drop your scions out, and they're about to get charged by Genestealers next turn, popping this 1 command point stratagem could inflict a few casualties on the bugs before they get in. So how would I use Valkyries in game then? I think that there's a few different ways that you can go. You could either have a lone Valkyrie, full of scary special weapons to be able to provide a decent punch to the most important area of the battlefield turn 1, or you could potentially invest in them very heavily, take a whole bunch of Valkyries, load them up with either scions or veteran squads, and play the air cavalry style list, where you have immense mobility and squads being able to drop all over the board, at the expense of weaker firepower and far less bodies. I personally think that using either special weapon squads, veteran squads, or scion squads are perfectly reasonable uses of the Valkyrie's transport capacity. The veterans and the special weapons certainly profit from being able to zoom in very close to the enemy army very quickly, and it makes them a lot more attractive options, where the scion squads, in general, I would say need to make use of one of their unique buffs for getting out of Valkyries to actually make it more worth it. Things like those Capic Eagles, with the +1 to hit, the stratagem that lets them set up very close to the enemy, or maybe the Gravshoot Commando from the Vigilus detachment. My reasoning for this is that the Stormtroopers generally get to deep strike anyway, so for your average squad it's usually just going to be better just to deep strike them in normally, rather than paying well over 100 points for a transport that will let them do exactly the same. Though I do appreciate if you're trying to build a full scion army, then not everyone can start in deep strike, and these are a very good way of pseudo deep striking some scions turn 1. When you deploy your Valkyries full of nastiness, they ideally want to be safe from as much enemy firepower as possible. Usually this will mean that you're going to be able to set them up right at the back of your deployment zone to outrange as many enemy guns as possible. Bear in mind that their movement range isn't infinite. 45 inches will leave you out of range of some areas of the board if you're putting them right at the back, so weigh up as to whether or not this is actually going to limit where you're going to want to drop. The Valkyries themselves are very durable for their points, but once you start putting a very squishy, very expensive infantry squad inside each one, then that becomes a lot less so, because if the enemy takes out that Valkyrie, that expensive fancy infantry squad is pretty much made redundant at least for a few turns, as they get out of the downed Valkyrie in your own deployment zone, and won't be able to be dropped in enemy lines. For this reason, I typically want to try and get out the things inside the Valkyries to threaten and destroy enemy units turn 1 if at all possible, as it minimises the chance of them being exploded in a Valkyrie and basically being put out of the entire game. Basically you just need to look for good sites for them to get out. Ideally they should be getting their special weapons in range of a key enemy threat, and ideally if you can combine that with them being in cover or perhaps out of line of sight of other enemy units, then that could also be good. Sometimes these fragile squads that you get out of the Valkyries are almost certainly going to die next turn. If that's so, I genuinely seriously consider trying to charge with them, if it's actually going to achieve something important, like potentially locking up an enemy tank and stopping it shooting. It's honestly better that than them just getting gunned down trivially by some enemy anti-infantry squad, for no further gain. After the Valkyrie has made its drop off, they can then be used as disruption and distraction units, moving around, getting in the way of things, and potentially using their very long movement to swoop to the back of the enemy's army, and pick off weak troops or exposed characters. Their long movement characteristic could easily let them hop over a screen and get those multiple rocket pods firing at an exposed enemy character, which honestly could be one of the best uses of a Valkyrie in terms of getting value out of its firepower. If by some miracle your dropping forces do happen to survive after they drop down, don't forget that you can potentially get the units back in the Valkyrie if it's going to be more helpful than chipping away with whatever firepower they have, potentially to be deployed again next turn, or even just to keep them safe from becoming kill points for the enemy. Overall, the Valkyrie is a unit that really makes or breaks an entire style of guard play, the air cavalry build. In general, I'd argue that the air cavalry build isn't quite as strong as the other guard competitive options that we have at the moment, just because it doesn't have enough firepower and durability to shape up with some of the very scary threats in the meta right now. They're certainly interesting, and a very high skill level army, but if commanded rightly can certainly have devastating results, but just because of the low numbers of bodies on the table, and relatively short range limited firepower, they are a bit of a challenging army to play, and aren't necessarily likely to give you as much for an easy ride in the competitive meta, compared with other guard options that we have, things like Russ's artillery and infantry. All that being said, it's a really interesting way of playing guard, and single Valkyries inside an otherwise more balanced guard list could certainly be very effective, as we generally lack options for reaching out and getting very quickly towards the enemy while putting out a decent amount of firepower, so I could see one working well in certain lists. If you think I've missed anything or left anything out, please let me know down in the comments, as well as if you've had any experience using Valkyries dropping off deadly cargo in 8th edition. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics for regular guard videos. We usually have one coming out every 2 days, so feel free to check back if you'd like to see more. If you'd like to help out the channel and are thinking about buying any Warhammer in the UK in the near future, please consider buying through Element Games after clicking the link below in the video description. If you order something in from them after pressing the link, then a small proportion of the profit goes towards Auspex Tactics without costing you any extra at all. Element's always been very reliable for me in terms of delivering what I ordered, so I don't hesitate to recommend them, and they're a very nice discount that they do on Games Workshop products. Thanks again for listening. I'll hope to see you guys in the next episode.